Hello artists, and welcome to Creativity Time with Julia Major. Today I'm going to be talking about the studio habit Engage and Persist and some amazing picture books that describe and show that habit. As always, a lot of the studio habits combine, so you may find other studio habits in these picture books as well. And I also wanted to point out that picture books can be enjoyed by all ages, so I will make some rough recommendations of ages for some of these books, but they truly can be enjoyed by both kids and adults. Engage and Persist is a little bit of a tricky studio habit, I think, because it's easy to just focus on the persist part, but I think when the studio habits were identified by Harvard Project Zero, they were really smart to include that word engage. The engage describes how we as artists become passionate about things, how we care about things, how we pick what we want to care about and get involved in it. So that's just as important to me as the persist aspect. I also think that it's really important to point out that especially in American culture, we can sometimes be obsessed with this idea of people pulling themselves up by their own bootstraps, and that really isn't reality. So I tried to pick stories, whether fanciful or based in reality, that show people persisting as part of a group coming together, and the real struggles that they face. And I also think that it's good to know as artists that we need to pick the things that we think are worth persisting over and not give people a hard time if they quit or if they don't succeed, because knowing when to quit is just as important as knowing when to keep going, and we shouldn't just focus on trying to engage and persist as individuals. We should be looking to see how we can lift other people up in their dreams and their ways of finding justice. So I just wanted to point that out. The first book is Old Bear Stories by Jane Hissey, and I'm going to be linking down below some content related to many of these. The author and illustrator of this book actually has her own YouTube channel where she plays an award-winning series based on the books. So you can actually watch a TV show based on these books, but I highly recommend getting a physical copy of the books. They're absolutely magical and have some of the most detailed illustrations that I've ever seen. They're a wonderful combination of being realistic and whimsical. That was my cat in the background, by the way. She also enjoys Old Bear. So the other thing about Old Bear is I do recommend getting the actual collection. This includes, as far as I know of, I believe all the Old Bear stories, so you could buy them individually, but why do that when you could get the complete Old Bear collection, because it is that good. It is out of print, but you can find it pretty affordably still because it was a very popular book. And the story within this that is related to Engage and Persist is the very first story, which is suitably called Old Bear. And just to give you a sense of some of the fantastic illustrations, here's one. You can see that it almost looks like a photo, but it's actually done with colored pencil. It's remarkable. So the story of Old Bear is how Old Bear ends up in the attic and his friends band together to save him and to find him. And it's the story of a lot of trying again, a lot of coming up with ideas, a lot of things that are part of the artistic process. This book is really great for all ages. Purple, Green, and Yellow is another book that is a favorite from my own childhood. Old Bear, I actually found many years later than from when I was a kid. I didn't have a copy when I was a kid, but I read it with a book buddy when I was around 8 years old, and it made such an impression on me that I found it over a decade later. This book, similarly, my kindergarten teacher read, and I was absolutely obsessed with it to the point that when I was much older, my parents got me a copy for my birthday. I absolutely love it. And it really sort of shows guess the underbelly, the bad side of when you can kind of get so hooked into engaging persisting. Not really, but there's that sense of danger that we have as an artist when we get so into something. And I think that's why I connected with this book so much as a kid and still do, is really about the addictiveness of art and how into art you can get, and how crazy art can get. It's really imaginative. It's super funny. I don't want to give it away, but it's absolutely worth a read. It's written by Robert Munsch, who actually writes his books by telling the stories to kids and then revising them from there. So it's a wonderful read aloud story. All of his books are great for reading aloud. I really recommend pretty much all of them. And the illustrations are absolutely fantastic and funny and colorful. They really fit the theme, which is coloring. If you like the book I Ain't Gonna Paint No More, this book is on a very similar topic and you'd probably enjoy it as well. Baseball Saved Us is written by Ken Mochizuki and Don Lee. By the way, on a lot of these names, I tried to look up a pronunciation online, but I wasn't always able to find a live interview with the author or illustrator, so hopefully I'm getting the names correct. There are some amazing interviews that I've linked below with this author, but I wasn't able to find any that was auditory. But there's one in particular that's absolutely fantastic that I will link. His parents were in a Japanese internment camp. He was not, because he was not born yet. But this is showing the story of things that really did happen of inside Japanese internment camps, which is where Japanese people were put during World War II because Americans, including the U.S. president, thought that they were a threat to us, even though they were citizens, and it was unjust to put them there, and it has later been declared such by our own courts. They created often baseball teams and other activities inside because it was a way to maintain hope and also a way to show for themselves and for others, even if they didn't see it, that they were American citizens and they were part of our culture as much as they were part of Japanese culture. And so this is a story of one little boy and his baseball team and what that meant to him in the conditions he endured in the internment camps. The illustrations are very dark and dusty, really beautiful, but also haunting, and that's suitable because it's a story of difficult times and someone who found hope in a really terrible time. It doesn't justify what happens, but it is showing how people find meaning and purpose when things are difficult. It's also an award winner. It won a Parents' Choice Award. Many of these books have won awards. This is John Henry by Julius Lester and Jerry Pinkney. And at the risk of sounding like I say everything was an absolute childhood favorite, I did not have this book as a child, but I was absolutely obsessed with Jerry Pinkney as a kid. I was so excited when he finally won a Caldecott. This book won a Caldecott honor, but he eventually won the actual Caldecott. I would have loved for it to be a book where he portrayed people because he's an amazing African-American illustrator who portrays black people in many of his books. So I was sort of disappointed that the book that won had animals in it. But he has had a lot of books that have gotten the Coretta Scott King Award, Caldecott Honors, and then, as I said, eventually a Caldecott. And this is a Caldecott Honor-winning book about John Henry. There's a lot of debate as to whether John Henry was a real person, but whether or not John Henry was a real person, he represents the story of the hardworking people on the railroad, building the railroad so that the railroads could exist. And many of those people were black or Asian, often not paid very well, often not respected well. And so this is based on the very famous song of John Henry and includes some lyrics, but adds in other things as well. And the illustrations are absolutely beautiful. They have this speckled effect that is just, I mean, it is unique to Jerry Pinkney. You can identify when you start to see his artwork, it by this very distinctive, spectacular style. And also, I just feel like his faces are always so expressive. You look at the eyes, there's just so much there. But it also is really wonderful, beautiful writing. Do get out your Kleenex when you read this book because you might cry. I would say the same thing for Baseball Saved Us. They're both beautiful stories with a lot of rays of hope. But it is a tearjerker. And to give you a sense of some of the pages, you can see, like I said, he's also really well known and fabulous at portraying animals as well as portraying people and setting. I mean, he's just great at portraying everything. The Big Book of Peace is a book that I've had since childhood, and it's really what introduced me to understanding Japanese internment camps, and it has many great stories in here. This really has some of what are the most honored and most respected writer-illustrators of our time are in this book. I forget what year exactly it was written. I believe the 90s, but some of what are considered the all-time greats of children's illustration and writing were involved in this book. The two that I remember really standing out to me as a child were a story called The Treehouse that is about two little girls and a feud they have over tree houses and their friendship. And I love it because it sort of puts war and feuds on the level of a kid. It's good to learn about the bigger picture, but we also should all look at how we're living out peace in our own lives, and The Treehouse is about that. And then the other one that was especially powerful to me is called Letter from a Japanese Concentration Camp. Most of the time people use the word internment camp for the camps in the U.S. of Japanese, but that is the term that's used in this book. And it's a fictional letter, but it does talk about real conditions and the sense of injustice of putting our own citizens and looking at people from the color of their skin, the ethnicity, and treating them in a way that we did that was completely unfair. And it really puts it in a way that anyone can understand why it was unjust. So it's very powerful. In terms of the studio habit, engage and persist, perhaps one of the stories that most fits that, because all of these stories have an element of engage and persist, but I think one that is especially about that is I Was There by Marilyn Sachs, which is a story of a little girl protesting. It's very cute, very funny, but also very heartfelt, and I just love the sense of sort of movement and expression in her illustrations. Actually, I'm sorry, it's illustrated by Mark Simont, but it's written by Marilyn Sachs. There's also, by the way, a story in here that was illustrated by Jerry Pinkney, so he is quite prolific. Pinkney is absolutely adorable. Most of these books can really be appreciated by almost all ages. They may not be able to be read by younger kids, but there's something there that they can appreciate, especially if you're open to having conversation. But Pinkney is a fairly easy read, and I love the visual texture to it. You can see the texture of the paint. Of course, it's, the book itself is not physically painted, but you can still see that texture there. I absolutely love the texture on the little dog. And it's a great example of what I was talking about we need to decide what's worth engaging, persisting in. I don't want to give away the plot, but I will say that this dog sort of changes what its values are throughout the course of the story. That makes it sound much more serious than it is. It is absolutely funny and adorable. You can see one of the illustrations here. The dog is getting in lots of trouble, lots of spills and messes, which I think we can all relate to as artists in terms of our engaging and persisting. And it's really whimsical, really cute, a wonderful book to get if you are in the process of adopting a dog from a local shelter, or just if you love dogs and you love cuteness. As I said before, I'm going to be putting a lot of links below. I'm making sure not to put any read alouds of these books that are not approved by the authors and illustrators themselves, because I want to respect them. But there's some great interviews. There's some wonderful resources. There's all of the Little Bear stories. So there are a lot of good things down below if you check. There are so many wonderful picture books on the Studio Habit, Engage, and Persist that I absolutely will be making another video soon. So stay tuned for that, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Share with a friend if you want to share the word of these picture books and the wonderful art that's happening here that you can make. Thank you for coming for Creativity Time with Julia Major. Thank you for coming to Creativity Time with Julia Major. And I hope you have a very colorful day.